Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group with our roundtable partner, Veteran Advocacy Project. May is Mental Health Awareness Month and Military Appreciation Caregiver Month, and it's also Memorial Day weekend, Saturday, May 28, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelly. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. We have our partner with us today, Brent G. Filbert. He's with the retired 30 years U.S. Navy veteran, worked at the Pentagon, a professor, and the director of military law at the Veteran Advocacy Project. And also a panelist with us, Amy Holzer. She's Holzer-Weber, director of the Civil Practice at the Veterans Advocacy Project. We're going to talk about housing issues and rights for veterans. So we want to talk about a few things. I'm going to give you a little background on Amy. She works to keep veterans in housing, particularly when it comes to evictions, rent, and repair disputes. Also, rights for veterans. And before joining the Veterans Advocacy Project, she has an impressive resume. Previously supported the magistrate in Brooklyn Family Court. Also presided over cases in child support, spousal support, and paternity. She was also the project director of the Mobile Legal Help Center at the New York Legal Assistance Group, and notably represented survivors of intimate partner violence and family, matrimonial, and immigration matters. And she's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Ivy League, before getting her law degree from the University of Connecticut Law School, where she was the co-symposium editor of the Connecticut Law Review. Welcome to our show.
Hey, Sean. Good to be with you again.
Great to be with you guys. So tell us about housing issue and also rights for veterans, and what are you guys working on in that area?
Sean, so let me I'll kick it off first by just asking Amy to address. I mean, she just has a terrific background in this area and helping veterans. But first, I think that would be to sort of frame the issue. What is the homelessness issue for veterans in the United States like? And then start from there. And then also what happens or what she can do to help a veteran who's facing eviction or other housing issues. So, Amy, could you go ahead and kick that off?
Sure, and thank you for having me. So in the United States, according to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, approximately 40,056 veterans are homeless on any given night. Over the course of a year, twice that many experience homelessness. Of Americans, there are 7% that are veterans, but nearly 13% of all of those are homeless are veterans. So what we are able to do is help those veterans seek assistance in housing court and with accessing services so that they can be rehoused.
So how is that process like? So what's the first step? First, identifying people that are homeless, and then how do you find quality housing for them?
So for us at the Veteran Advocacy Project, most people will come to us either through a partner site or they will contact us themselves. For veterans that are seeking assistance, they can contact the VA Medical Center and go there for assistance. There is also a national call center for homeless veterans. And that number is on the VA webpage as well, but it's a national call center that not only vets can access, but also their families or others that are concerned for them. So they could, so if they're accessing the VA Medical Center or if they're accessing that number, they will then be connected with a VA staff member who can then assist them with either accessing the programs, if that is what they need, or possibly legal assistance as well. Okay,
and then is there a bounty of homes or shelters for people to go to? What's the supply chain look like on that end of it? 'Cause I think a lot of people get concerned that there's nothing for them.
So shelter-wise, I think is very much dependent on the area that you're in. But as far as specific veteran programs, there is SSVF, which is Supportive Services for Veterans Families. And these are grants that are provided to private nonprofits to assist veterans in these facilities, these organizations that get these grants, provide case management and supportive services to prevent the imminent loss of veterans' homes. And they're also able to help them rehome or rehouse both vets and their families. So these grants, if a veteran was to go on to the VA website there or contact the VA Medical Center or the National Call Line, they can then be provided with a organization in their area that would be able to provide these services. Now, there are some requirements that go along with them. For SSVF services, there's income requirements, but that is, those grants are able to help veterans look for for housing, help them in the housing process. There is also what's called a HUD-Dash voucher, which is a collaborative program between HUD's Housing Choice Vouchers and rental assistance and VA case management and supportive services. So that generally the veteran would need to go through a Department of Homeless Services facility to be screened for that voucher. But that voucher then is a voucher that one can bring to a home to be able to assist with living in that home with the monetary, with the rent, or with, it would be rental assistance. So that would assist them with the rent. So those are different ways that veterans are able to access the services to help them with rehousing. And also SSVF sometimes provides rental assistance as well if a veteran finds themselves in need of that. And there's basically, veterans come to us, and one of the first questions we ask is, do you want to remain in your home, or are you looking to move? Because that will change the litigation part. I'm representing the veterans in court, and so it's a different theory of the case, or a different way we would work the case, depending on what the ultimate goal of that veteran and their family is.
Mm-hmm. So what do you, from your experience in dealing with and representing veterans and trying to help them stay in their homes or find new housing, or basically assisting in their financial issues, what are the main causes that you see of these financial burdens? Someone coming, because it's hard to, I think, for a lot of people to understand how someone can go into something as honorable as the military and then come out and then find themselves in economic straits.
Sure. So go ahead, Amy. I'm happy to jump in or whatever, but I would just say, and Amy and I were talking about this before the show, is that one of the primary factors is mental health issues coming out of the military. So PTSD, traumatic brain injury, being the victim of sexual assault, those veterans in that situation just have significantly higher numbers of homelessness and housing issues than veterans who don't have those problems. Amy, I don't know, you want to jump in there and add more to that, but the numbers bear that out, and that's definitely our experience in representing veterans.
Definitely. I think, there's, homeless in general are dealing with a shortage of affordable housing, especially right now, and having a livable income, access to health care, all of what the homeless in the United States are dealing with in general are also being dealt with by veterans, in addition to the mental health issues that they are needing to deal with. And I think, especially in housing, you receive a lot of different notices. You receive, the court is not always easy. And I think if you're suffering from mental health, illness, it makes it that much harder to be following up on, the different court notices that you're receiving, the different landlord notices, or even dealing with a landlord is that much more difficult if you're also dealing with your own medical issues and your own personal issues. And so I think you see an intersection with many homeless, but especially in the veteran community, when they're dealing with so many, with their own different issues, and then having to then also deal with the housing issue, which is can often be a full-time job of them having to, to ascertain what it is that's going on, and the legalese. And, I work with veterans in representing in non-payment cases and holdovers and HP actions. But one of the big things is that when somebody gets often, so in order to bring a case, you can't have self-help. In most states in the United States, a landlord cannot just say, I don't want you to live here anymore, and change the lock. Mm-hmm. That's not allowed. Right. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but legally it's not allowed. But what they do, so what they have to do is bring the veteran to court. And bring anybody to court, but bring the veteran and their family to court. Before they can file that those court papers, they need to they need to send notice to the veteran.
And this is for foreclosures and evictions, or is this just for one or the other? Does the process work the same for evictions and foreclosures?
No, there are different laws in place for foreclosures. There are still notice requirements, but they are different than for evictions in a rental process. And in the rental process, the notices that have to be provided, there are requirements that go along with them, but they are often, the notices, in my opinion, are sometimes beefed up, so to speak, so they get scarier from the landlord. And so so they'll send a notice saying, you need to be out by May 30th, or and it's basically, or we go to court. Mm-hmm. But I've seen other things added there, or they'll just say you must be out by May 30th. And so somebody gets this notice, and it's scary, and nobody wants to be homeless and to lose their house. And I think there's also, people don't want the marshal coming to their door and literally kicking them out, that there's a social element, in my opinion, of that as well. And so I have spoken to many veterans who, there was one specifically that the intake coordinator contacted me on a Friday night and said, this veteran just received this notice and sent it to me, and he's packing, and he was literally packing to move out that night. And this was not a notice of eviction. This was a notice that you had until whatever date to move out, or they would bring a court case. But the veteran didn't understand that, and so the veteran was packing. And that's obviously their right if they want to leave, but they didn't have to leave. And I think that sometimes if people don't contact legal services or other services to receive help, they're misinformed, and that they could have stayed in that apartment. And often there are defenses to these cases as well. So you might owe money, but the landlord might not have done XYZ that they were supposed to do. And unless you go to court or you have a back and forth with the other side, then you're not going to know that. And so I think the first step should always be to try to access an attorney to see what your rights are before leaving and before getting overwhelmed by the situation.
And that's what people get afraid of, is that for the person who is being evicted or being foreclosed on, they feel like they can't afford an attorney. So how do they access services like yours or organizations like yours, where they can get some kind of help, legal help, and not have to come out of pocket with it to be able to get some kind of defense?
So we're based in New York City, and because housing law is state-based, we can only practice it in New York State. That being said, I think that contacting the legal aid in their area, veterans can contact us, and we, even if we can't represent them because it's out of state, we will provide referrals. So we will look into other we're able to access different platforms and know what type of case they have, and then be able to refer them. And I think that is sometimes lost, that people that are not lawyers don't necessarily understand what type of case they have. Mm-hmm. And so it's that much harder to then find an attorney if you don't know what type of attorney you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think if you contact the Veteran Advocacy Project, and even if we're not able to help, we're able to do an intake, figure out what the problem is, and then refer to, to a place that might be able to assist. Generally speaking, though, legal aids in the various areas that people live would be a good place to start. Also, the VA Medical Center, if they're able to connect them with an SSVF funded program, they're then often able to refer as well. So a lot of our cases come from SSVF funded sites as well as the VA. And so we're able to cross-refer to different people. So I think as long as a veteran gets connected to one, or at least one place to help them, they can then request those services from there.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because there's an economic component to this, and this is for Brent and for you, Amy. So the landlord is, you have different levels of landlords. You have corporate landlords where it's a huge corporation maybe owning a lot of property, and one unit may not be a big financial burden to them, but they're still looking at the bottom line. But then you have small landlords, or maybe a mom and pop, and maybe there's an unfortunate situation where a person's not paying rent. So now they're in, particularly after this pandemic, where you had a lot of moratoriums on evictions and things. How do you navigate the economic part of it when possibly the building itself could be at risk to going into foreclosure, and you might have a tenant in there who's a veteran? Is there any kind of financial reprieve for the landowner, or for the tenant, or for the owner of the property? Ms. Brent can maybe you can start with that. Or,
well, go ahead, Amy. This is more your area than mine, but go ahead.
So we don't represent landlords generally in cases, so I will start with that. That being said, there are, specifically right now, I can think of the ERAP program that is helping tenants pay for rent, but it's going to the landlords in and so that I think that has been helping to an extent on both sides. But I do believe there are other programs available for landlords. I don't practice in that area to be able to say specifically, but I do think in court that is also discussed. And so, and ultimately, if we're representing a tenant that's a veteran, and we are assisting them with obtaining grants for back rent, that will ultimately help the landlord, because then the landlord is getting that money. So when I say defenses, it's not necessarily to not pay rent. It's to find a way to pay the rent, or to figure out how to best go forward. And I think that often helps both sides. And especially, there are programs out there, there are grants out there that veterans and others are often not aware of that exist, that can help. And again, obviously, if a tenant gets a grant to pay, some of the ERAP money that has been given has been substantial. And so that then obviously helps the landlord, because they then have that back rent. So I don't specifically represent the landlords in those cases.
Brent, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would say that the other part to it is with veterans who are having housing issues, it's often because they have mental health issues coming out of the service, and maybe have a negative discharge that is keeping them from getting access to VA for health care, for disability compensation. It keeps them from getting a job. So the other part for the veteran that we do is try and get their discharge upgraded to something where they have access to that. So then they have income to pay for rent, and they don't get themselves in these situations. So it's a little bit of a vicious circle for veterans who have mental health issues and become homeless, because often they don't have access to the things they need to be able to pay rent and that sort of thing. So that's a whole other component that you and I have talked about before, that really is a big factor in getting veterans in a situation where they don't, can't pay rent. But once they get that fixed, it's amazing because then they have no problem taking care of those things, and it really helps everybody, including the landlords, to have somebody in place there who has that sort of stability of income and in their life. So that's very important.
This is my last question. We're running a little out of time. So, Amy, how sustainable has this been so far? So, the people that you've helped in your experience, do they tend to stay in their properties long term, or is it more of a temporary fix?
So I will qualify that I've been at the Veteran Advocacy Project since February, but I've been doing this work for a while. I think the key goes back to that first decision of, do you want to stay in the apartment or are you looking to leave? And if the decision is they want to stay, then I think that it is of a more long term, because then a lot of these programs are actually not going to give the money unless there is a plan going forward as to how they're going to stay in the apartment. So I think that's a very, at least for me, that's a very important first conversation, because you don't want to get a veteran into the position that we got the rent paid off, and now they're earning $5 more, which I've seen, a month than the rent. That's not sustainable. So we need to have that conversation and determine, is there more benefits out there? And that's also when the referrals within our organization are helpful, because are there benefits that the veteran is not accessing that they may be able to access, which would then provide more income? Is there a voucher that's available that would pay part of the rent, and then they wouldn't have to pay the entire thing, so it's sustainable long term? I think most people want to remain in their apartments. They want to pay. They want, they want it to be sustainable, and I do think that it is, as long as you have those conversations and you really think about it ahead of time. But I have, the ones that were I have a bunch of people that through COVID, as we all know, there's been job loss, there's been, lots of loss, and now they're back on their feet and they just needed a little bit of help to get there. And now going forward, they're able to stay in their jobs and stay in their apartments.
Amy?
So I do think it's sustainable.
Amy, I'm glad you have you on the show. This was a great conversation. Amy Holzer-Weber and Brent G. Filbert, thanks for your time, and thanks for being on our show again. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.